because it is raining and I'm just using the headset on my iPhone, but I wanted to go over and explain the purpose and how to install a Trunnion Upgrade kit for any LS style motor, whether it's a 5.3, a 4.8, a 6 liter, a 6.2, a 7 liter, just the basics of why you'd want to do it and how you would go about doing it. Not so much though installing the Trunnion Upgrade into your rocker. That will be another video, but basically the purpose of the Trunnion Upgrade here is that on your factory rocker arms here, you have a bushing or a bearing set up with needle bearings that will sit encased inside the center of your rocker arm, and that allows it to rotate back and forth between, where your push rod will contact and then your valve on the valve spring, and it'll sit there and it'll, obviously as the cam moves, it'll push this up and down, push the valve spring down, open the valve, so on and so forth. I'm sure if you're even attempting this, then you at least understand that much. But if not, that's what it does. Now, as time progresses, as your car gets a little older, gets a little more miles on it, or if you're probably revving it a little bit higher than most or quite frequently, over time what will happen is this case here, this end cap will wear and it'll fail. And what will happen is it'll come out, and then these are not really captured bearings. Once that comes out, all your needles will come out with it and go into your motor. Now, generally, if you're lucky, they'll stay in the head, but if you do this for prolonged exposure, and you'll hear it, it'll make a noise, it'll be pretty obvious, but it will cause, damage if these go into your oil pan and then get picked up and sucked up and run through your oil track. So that's definitely something that you would want to diagnose immediately and have, resolved as quickly as possible. But what a lot of companies are offering now, this is the Brian Tooley Racing kit, is they are offering the Trunnion Upgrade. And what this does is, instead of having that open style bearing with the needles that sit across this race here, they go ahead and they use a captured bearing setup, and then you just push your standard pedestal out, push their unit in, and then they use C-clips to hold it in place, and it's just a stronger unit as a whole, and it moves real nice, it rolls real nice too. But this will go in place of your factory bearing setup. And then once you put that in there, you don't really have to worry about, even if this C-clip failed, it's not going to cause needles to go into your oil pan. However, you may have to find that C-clip. So I'm going to go over to the car here and show you how to put these in, and we'll go from there. Now, this is my 2005 Corvette here. It does have a ProCharger unit on it here. And I just wanted to show you real quick what you're going to be looking for, just in case you wanted to check and see if your car already has a Trunnion Upgrade in it. Maybe a previous owner had done that and you just want to verify it. So basically, I'll go over this here in a second. I've already got the valve cover removed. I've taken the coils off and everything like that. But what you're going to go ahead and do here is, for this setup, they use the Allen head style bolts. But you'll just look down the side there and you can see if we can get this to focus here, that is not just your standard roller. That is actually an upgraded roller. You'll see that it does have the C-clip there, but that's how you can tell if your car has already been done. Now, this car does have stock valve springs and push rods, and those will be getting done here soon, and I'll make a video for that as well. But just to give you an idea of what it is that you're looking for, if you wanted to know if your car already had this done, then versus a stock one, which again, this is a stock assembled one that I haven't taken apart or anything. If it looks like that, then odds are down the road you might have problems if you're beating on your car. So we'll go ahead and get back to it here. I'm going to button this side up, and then I'll show you how to disassemble the other side, and we'll go from there. Okay, so just real quick, we're going to go over what it is you're going to have to do to get to your rockers. You have to remove the valve cover. So the tools that you're going to need to do this are, you're going to need more than likely a deep well 10mm socket so that you can get your coil bracket off. And then you're also going to need an 8mm of any style to get the valve cover bolts out here. And then for mine, I've already had this off before, so we'll go ahead and just remove spark plugs off of your coils, because that's just the coil bracket's just going to come up and out. And then we'll go ahead and disconnect here, and that's just a push tab, pulls right up and out, get it out of the way. And then in my case here, normally you're going to have a 10mm down in there. I've already got mine out. I don't plan on putting it back. And then you'll have one here, 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 and then one there. Also, I'm not going to put that one back either. Most people would do that. I don't subscribe to needing all of those, but yeah. So you just take those out. It's really hard to do with one hand. Set this down. I'll pull those out. I just set them up there on the cowl so I know where they are at all times. Make sure they don't fall anywhere into the motor. Didn't loosen that one enough. And once you have the coils out, to go in and pull it out, then you'll just have your 4 8mm bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then your valve cover will come right out. Well, you probably have to jiggle it back and forth, but you get the idea here. Let me take these out here. Okay, so as a quick tip, as you're pulling these out here, I break them loose and then I just spin them by hand because they aren't super duper tight, because it's not a super duper strong bolt. You're not going to torque this down, it'll break inside of the head and then you're going to have a problem. I just usually just snug them down and go from there, because you don't want to break one of those off. That'd be awful, because then you'd have to find a way to extract it, and that is always a real pain, so don't do that. But as a tip here, to make sure when you're winding these out, to make sure you've got it all the way out before you just start yanking on this valve cover, is I always just go ahead and just make sure that they're completely out. Now, these gaskets, well, that one's gone forever now. These gaskets that are on these bolts here are actually supposed to stay inside that valve cover, so I'm going to have to recondition mine or get new ones, but just pull it out, make sure that it's completely free of the cylinder head itself before pulling on that valve cover, because otherwise you could damage the threads in the head, and you don't want to do that either. Jiggle it out, and then there you go. Again, so those are all stock. So I'm going to go ahead and get those pulled out. And then again, all you'll need for those is just another 8mm. The factory rocker arm bolts are just going to be 8mm all the way across. Now, when you do go to put this back in, you do want to go ahead and torque those down. Torque spec is 22 foot-pounds. So you want to make sure that you get that right. You don't want to over-torque them, but you don't want to under-torque them, because they move a lot, especially at RPM. So you don't want them rattling loose or anything like that. You don't want to over-torque them, because that's an aluminum head. Damage the threads on that, again, you'll be pretty upset about it. So I'm going to go ahead and get these pulled out of here. I'll be right back. As a heads up, when you start loosening these up here, your initial turn on every single one of these, because they are torqued down, it's going to be a little tight. You're going to feel that initial snap, and then they get real loose real fast. And then you just wind them out like so. I turn them the same way I do the valve cover. I just pull it out, make sure the bolt is free of the cylinder head itself, and that's when I know I can just take the rocker right up out of there. So I'm just going to loosen this one here. That was free. It moves a lot. Pull that out. And then you just take them out. And I'm going to leave my tray in there. But yeah, take these off to the side. Set them down here with the others. Now, this would be helpful too if you're going to go ahead and do push rods. Now would be the time. I'm actually not because I'm waiting for them. But your push rods are just these here. And what happens is when you bounce this thing off a rev limiter, as with any push rod style motor, these will bend. And when they bend, they obviously aren't the right length anymore to push that rocker up. Your valve won't open as far as it should. Or if it gets real bad, you bend this push rod, it'll start digging into your casting where it sits. I've had that happen on another car, and as it digs in, then you've got shavings going into your motor. So you always want to go ahead, and if you are beating on a car, I would always suggest getting hardened push rods instead of the stock ones, because again, they are prone to bending, and if that does happen, it can cause a lot of problems down the road. So always a good suggestion. I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these pulled out here, and then we'll start on getting the other one set in. And it'll be just a moment here. Putting these in here is, obviously, when you take these out, you will notice that your rocker tray has a concave in it because it's contoured to fit the center section of this rocker here. It's also got a bevel to it as well. You'll notice while the top side is going to be flat, in case you put those in backwards, upside down, or anything like that, not really backwards, but upside down, you want to make sure that that concave side goes down on that pedestal. I know it sounds silly, but I mean, obviously, if you put it in wrong flat side against that curved side, you're just going to ruin it. And also, when you slide those in, always start the bolts by hand. Don't just hit them with an impact, because you want to make sure that you're not dicking up your threads or anything like that. They're fine threads, and you don't want to do that on an aluminum head. Now, for me, before even putting these in here, I went ahead and soaked them in oil. You want to have some oil on those threads. I mean, it's going to push out because it's a blind hole anyways, but just so that it makes it easier to get them started, and that you're not messing with anything, and not having any issues with metal on metal contact as you're spinning and winding those down. So I put mine here in this tub of oil. I'm going to go ahead and torque those back down. It is, again, it's 22 foot-pounds for each one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've got everything buttoned back up, put all back together. Make sure to reconnect all my spark plug wires. Make sure to do the coil harness connector here. So everything's back together. It should be ready to fire up. I think what I'm going to do next here, though, is I'm going to replace this fitting and use mine, because that's for a fuel pressure gauge and a return line setup. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. But after you've got all that done, you should be able to go ahead and fire it up and, you know, try and see, have your radio off, listen for any odd noises or anything like that, make sure that everything's the way it should be. But that's about it. That's all it takes to go ahead and do really just, you know, rocker arms, push rods, and valve cover gaskets. So hopefully this has been helpful. If it has, go ahead and give it a like or subscribe to my channel here at 74 Racing Tim. Thank you.